Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much. As I understand, the role of APRA is the oversight body providing regulation of the banking community, especially in such areas as the retention of capital reserve funds against lending and calls by depositors on their funds, and compliance by the banks with the regulations and directions of APRA in the bank mode of operation. Is that correct?
Broadly speaking, that's a summary, yes.
Well, in view of that role and in view of the extremely large number of complaints by borrowers as against various banks of application completions without the consent or instruction by the applicants, what action has APRA taken to ensure the banking code of conduct was adhered to?
So here's where there's a division of responsibilities. The responsibilities around responsible lending, which are essentially the issues that you talked about, are banks making loans to those individual customers that those individual customers can repay, primarily supervised by ASIC. Our responsibility is actually on the other side of the balance sheet, making sure that banks have, as you talked about, appropriate capital, other liquidity, etc., to make sure depositors get their money back. So our primary focus is protecting depositors. ASIC is primarily focused on whether borrowers are getting responsible loans.
Right. Well, then in light of that, in regard to the ANZ Bank takeover of the Landmark book, and taken into account that approximately 8 months later, ANZ placed so many borrowers under that loan book into default, did APRA notify ANZ on or around that date that its reserve funds were not compliant with the APRA regulations, and the bank was required to correct that imbalance, which resulted in triggering the default notices as against numerous farmers who had not in fact defaulted in their interest repayments?
I don't think so, but I'd take that on notice and confirm that for you.
Thank you. Well, then, taking into account the fact that APRA must have been aware of those numerous defaults, did APRA take any action to satisfy itself that the ANZ Bank was compliant in all respects to APRA's own regulation oversight of the banking industry?
Did APRA take any action in relation to ANZ and Landmark?
That's... Did you actually investigate when ANZ took over Landmark's clientele books?
Yes.
They actually didn't have the funds. They were not compliant with your regulations and the loans, and they actually had to start foreclosing on these customers who were not behind their repayments. Was that investigated? Was the bank investigated by APRA that they were actually complying with the rules and regulations? And if not, why not?
Well, I'm sure we were monitoring ANZ to make sure they were compliant with rules and regulations, and I certainly am not aware, I can't remember the exact time of the Landmark acquisition, but I'm certainly not aware of any suggestion that ANZ didn't have sufficient funds or didn't meet prudential requirements that we set. But again, I'll take it on notice. I'm happy to confirm that.
Has any investigation been done into it that you're aware of? And I think it was around about 2014.
Not by us.
So it hasn't been. Were complaints put into APRA by the clientele, by customers, with regards to?
It's quite possible we get. It's quite possible that Landmark customers, but I don't have those facts and figures here. Again, I'm happy to tell you what complaints we got on notice.
But if you did get a number of complaints, you would investigate it, but you're not aware of any investigation?
I'm not aware. We may have, depending on the nature of the complaints, we may have passed the issues to ASIC because it may have been more appropriate for them to investigate. As I said, I'm not aware of any investigation. I'm happy to take it on notice and confirm, but I think the answer will be we didn't undertake one.
Thank you. In the last session of Parliament, the Financial Sector Legislation Amendment, that's the Crisis Resolution Powers and Other Measures Bill 2017 provisions, was passed.
Yes.
According to the report on this bill by the Senate Economics Legislation Committee, this Parliament understands that bank deposits are protected by the Financial Claims Scheme, the FCS.
Yes.
I note the Senate Economics Legislation Committee report states, and I quote, "The FCS provides protection to deposits held in financial institutions and to policies with general insurers in the event that a financial institution fails. The FCS will be activated by the Australian Government when an institution fails, and once activated, will be administered by APRA. The question, which many voters are very worried about, is, and I am anxious to have verified by APRA, is, are bank deposits currently protected by the FCS? That is the financial claim scheme currently activated?"
Sorry, is it currently?
Activated.
Well, it's not currently activated in the sense that it's only activated when a bank fails. But if it is activated, so if a bank fails and the government activates the scheme, then depositors in ADIs up to the amount of $250,000 are protected.
So it is. So basically,
so
then
the
you're saying
legislation is there; it's available.
Activated.
If the circumstances arise that a bank fails, the mechanisms are there for it to work. The government, in a sense, switches it on, and we go through the process then of making sure that depositors, as I said, up to the limit of $250,000 per ADI, get their money.
You're protecting it.
APRA has
The bank accounts are
undertaken a lot
protected.
of work over the last couple of years around implementation of the financial claim scheme, working with industry to put in place prudential standards around reporting and reporting to us and reporting to the Reserve Bank on the amounts that are protected, and also running trial runs of the provision of information to the Reserve Bank to test that when the FCS is activated, that banks will be able to actually, and APRA and the RBA will actually be able to effectively get money to depositors within the timeframes that are specified.
And
I'm
just
getting
as a
a-
follow-up, sorry, Senator Hanson, you're absolutely right. There was some considerable concern from a particular group called the Citizens Electoral Council, who actually are a political party. But I understand that APRA submitted to that inquiry, that particular legislation inquiry, and
So
testified to that extent. And so did the RBA, and so did ASIC, and they said that those powers are not at all a threat to depositors' funds.
As I said in my opening statement, our core purpose set out in the Banking Act is protect depositors. And the FCS is there to make sure that particularly retail depositors, but depositors with amounts up to $250,000 are not at risk of losing their money should a bank fail.
So that's guaranteed by the government. It's definitely there, so there's no problems with that guarantee.
That's right. The way it works is that if needed, there's an appropriation that exists that can be drawn on to give depositors their money, and then there's a mechanism by which that cost is spread over the rest of the industry and recouped from the rest of the ADI sector. So it's not a cost to the taxpayer, and it's certainly there to protect the depositors.
I've had a lot of concerns from people getting in touch with my office, and they're actually really concerned. It's in the Crisis Resolution Powers and Other Measures Act, which empowers APRA to make determinations in secrecy to access private depositors' accounts in time of financial crisis to meet monetary demands. Would APRA state categorically the Act does not grant APRA that power?
Well, I'm a bit unsure of the specific act. I don't know whether any of my colleagues have an answer. Clearly, under that power, under that whole arrangement when you have a bank failure, part of the information we need is who are the depositors, what are their accounts, how much money have they got, so that we can exercise the financial claim scheme to get them the money. So if it's information about depositors, it's essential we have that information so that we make sure the payments go to the right people who are eligible to receive them for the right amounts.
What we've got past, guarantee the depositors their
Yep.
up to $250,000. What I'm saying is, in reverse now, if there's a crisis in this country, can depositors' monies be taken from them?
So in the Banking Act, so essentially if you're less than $250,000, the financial claim scheme kicks in, you get your money. for all depositors, be they individual people, be they businesses, large corporates who have more than $250,000, the next thing the Banking Act says is depositors have priority over the assets of the bank over everybody else. So other creditors of the bank.
My question
So they're
was,
first in the queue.
in a crisis in this country,
Yeah.
can you enact to actually take the money out of depositors' accounts, as happened in Crete in Greece?
No, we don't. We do not have the
cannot
power.
take-
We
you
do
cannot-
not have the power to bail in, is the sort of common language term, depositors' money.
Senator
Right.
Hanson, I think that question has been asked and answered numerous times, and we might move on. Senator Ketter.
Yes, thank you.